Welcome everybody to GZ Truth News. It is June 8th, 2024. We have our very special guest, Joachim Hagopian. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Please tell us all the updates, all the insights. What do you think is going on? What's happening?
Well, the world's fallen apart, Sean, by basically design, malefic design by the owners of pretty much everything on the earth. You know, there's the expression, the devil's dominion is the earth. Well, we're seeing it. We're seeing it firsthand now. Pretty much all the powerful structures on this earth are owned and controlled by a very small percentage of human beings. And I don't even call them human beings because they're psychopaths and they probably have all kinds of bloodline relations that go back to quote the fallen angels. But we won't go there. Anyway, yeah, as time has gone on, these psychopathic murderers have the agenda of depopulating the planet. We're at somewhere, I know it's less with COVID kill shots than 8 billion, but anyway, we'll say we're supposedly we're at around 8 billion total on the earth. And they want it knocked down to anywhere from about a half a billion to up to maybe 1 billion. So that means that 15 out of 16 out of all the people on this earth that are living and breathing at this moment, they want dead within a very short time. It's called genocide. And in this case, it's more than Palestinian genocide. That is in our face every day, graphically on social media, and it's for real. And that tells you what the power structure is. It's behind Israel. The founders of the Jewish state are the Rothschilds. And the Rothschilds are the banking cartel owners. And through usury debt, they have pretty much the planet enslaved in a banking system, economic system that is now in the process of collapse. We're seeing it in America and a lot of places on this earth. The evil ones, and they're comprised of more than just obviously a one bloodline family, the Rothschild. They're the Rockefellers, they're the royal families of Britain, of Netherlands, of Spain, of Belgium. The black nobility bloodlines, they maintain a lot of control. And they have decided that they want 15 out of 16 of us dead on this earth, primarily so that they can have absolute control. They are afraid because we are finding out well, not all, but lots of their crimes against humanity. The people are more exposed to the truth now than at any previous point in our recorded history. We have more illegal criminal evidence against them than at any other prior time. And they are afraid that the masses are waking up to the reality that we're all in the crosshairs of their genocide. We are all Palestinians in the crosshairs of their genocide. And so that's their agenda. And that's why what we have seen just in the course of the last year to 2 years, they are opening up multiple fronts of World War III. World War III is already going on. Even though it isn't quite to the extent yet, it's inching closer every day. But it isn't quite to the extent where it's head to head Western NATO force soldiers versus Eastern force soldiers in the Russians, or Western Israel forces soldiers versus Eastern forces, i.e., Iran and Hezbollah and Houthis and Hamas in the Middle East. They have two war fronts going now, and they're planning on a third one, of course, in the Pacific Asian region, which is going to be over, of course, Taiwan. We have U.S. has a one China policy, meaning supposedly the idea is there will be one Chinese people ethnically and one national country of Chinese. That is the U.S. official policy on paper. However, over the last year, all the generals, admirals, they're all saying China is our number one adversary, not even Russia, that we're going head to head with our proxy war with Ukraine. But they're saying China is the number one enemy, mainly because the U.S. is not, I don't believe any longer the U.S. is the most powerful nation on earth. We were for almost a century, but it's over. America has been significantly weakened. We can get into all that too, because I went to school with a man that's primarily responsible for weakening our military. At West Point, I was his assistant squad leader in Company G1 at West Point. And that man's name is Lloyd Austin. We can talk about that devil because he's behind, purposely by design, malefic design to weaken the military, the defense forces, offense forces, really, of America. And anyway, so yeah, this is the planned agenda: depopulate the planet through World War III. And we're at the doorstep to it actually going kinetic. There are many that are saying it's going to be any day, any week, maybe in July. I heard many saying even in this month. So, and the provocation is all Western forces. We have all these puppets. The Western puppets, they are completely controlled by the cabal, the deep state cabal, the bloodline owners of all the biggest corporations, all the media, all the governments through bribery, sexual blackmail, extortion. They control all of them in America and pretty much all in the West. Then we have the controlled opposition of the Eastern forces. I believe that they control them too, to a lesser extent. That's all. I'd like to think that Putin's a good guy, but I don't trust him. KGB for 25 years. He's very slick. He's very intelligent. Of all the world leaders, he is definitely the most skilled. And also, he has shown remarkable restraint because, let's face it, the Western foreign policy, primarily through the United States and NATO, has been a policy of encirclement of Russia and China, the deemed Cold War enemy. Encirclement policy. That means you use CIA, NGOs to basically organize coups against the democratically elected governments of all the countries that surround Russia and China. And the classic case now is, of course, Ukraine. 2014, there was an illegal coup. Victoria Nuland was in charge of that. She was under the tutelage of Hillary Clinton, one of the worst criminals ever in history. And she's a demonic witch at that. And I don't say that figuratively, literally, she is. And unfortunately, you know, I branch off as my train of thought deviates from one thought to the next. But we have a very powerful satanic elite death cult in control of the earth, either as politicians, puppets, or as the overlords of this earth, which are the bloodline families like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the royal families, etc. So that's the policy of the West, to encircle with hostile neighbors on the border of Russia and China, to overthrow. If there's somebody in there that's an ally of Putin, we got to get rid of them. And that's what happened in 2014. And then they had the Minsk agreement, where they have the leaders of Germany, Merkel, and the leader of France, basically broker a deal whereby the built up forces of the Nazi Azov battalions that basically had been trained by the NATO and the West to go into Donbass, which are comprised 98% of ethnic Russians. And that was the eastern provinces of Ukraine. And they were comprised, obviously, of ethnic Russians, and they wanted to kill them. And so they did. From 2014, the coup, the Nazis took over in Kiev, to 2022, for 8 years, they killed 14,000 ethnic Russian civilians. And so at the request of the Donbass region, which are Lugansk and Donetsk provinces that used to be eastern Ukraine, at their request, because it was SOS, they're dying and they needed help from a fellow Russian neighbor who is Putin in Russia. And so at their request, and they were on the set, they were basically doing a very big increase of artillery rounds into the city of Donetsk and all the places in Donbass, killing more. This is in January and February of 2022. And of course, on February 24th, 2022, that's when Putin did his incursion into Ukraine. And so there was a buildup and a plan for a full-on invasion by the neo-Nazi Azov battalion, the Ukraine military, into the Donbass to wipe out more than just 14,000. And this is all NATO backed. You know, they had training, they had they were at that time the biggest army in Europe. And it was all because US and NATO was building them up to basically do their number, where they become a thorn in the side of Russia, that the West does not respect international law, where you're supposed to have neutrality with a neighbor unless you're attacked and all this kind of thing. But they made it like unprovoked invasion by Putin. You know, everything's demonizing Putin as the next Hitler. Very wrong, very lie, and not accurate. I'm not saying he's an angel, but he's no Hitler. That's for damn sure. And if he was, he would have done a number on the West a long time ago. The man's shown remarkable strength in holding back and not having a blood fest of millions dying. But I'm afraid they're pushing him, prodding him, provoking him to the point where there is an existential threat on Russia, on his people, on his homeland, and he will defend his homeland. Now, here's the other angle that the West, that has basically has a history of false flags. I mean, lots of our US wars were started by false flags, where we blame the targeted enemy, the invented enemy of America. And at any time, as the most warring nation on earth in history, 93% of the 248 years the US has been in existence as a sovereign nation, we have been killing foreigners on foreign soil somewhere on this earth. 93% of the 248 years, we have been killing foreigners somewhere on this earth. We are the most warring nation on earth in history. And over the last century, we've had the biggest guns, and we've been doing millions worth of damage, of fatalities all over the earth. And that we get involved by false flags. And I'm afraid that what's happening now, with all the provocation going on, we could talk about the provocation because all that's very important to what's going on right now today. But with all that's going on, I am afraid that the US is going to pull a false flag. It could be a general just came out the other day, like last week in Singapore when they were doing their defense conference. He said, if there is a cyber attack of any NATO nation, it will be construed as an attack, an act of war against a NATO nation. And by Article 5 of the charter of the NATO countries, we must all come to the war and aid of that attacked country. So, in other words, he set it up where if there is a cyber attack on any nation belonging to NATO, which could be America or any of the European countries, that's an act of war, and we will consider that an act of war against NATO and take military action against them, i.e., an active kinetic World War III will begin if there is a false flag cyber attack done to any of the nations. And so what is NATO doing? They're developing all these installations along the border with Russia in the NATO countries that border Russia, and there's a whole bunch of them now. In 1991, Secretary of State James Baker said to Gorbachev, this is at the time that Gorbachev was the last leader of Soviet Union, and he said in 1991, not 1 inch eastward will NATO go. Kind of like the Minsk agreements, where they said, okay, we're not going to go into the Donbass anymore, and then they did. And so that's why I'm saying the West is full of lies. They're the enemy here. The governments of the West, as puppets of the cabal, black nobility bloodlines, they are the bad guys. The controlled opposition is probably the forces of the East, Russia, China, and Iran, and throw in North Korea, of course. And they're trying to throw in Venezuela with them. Basically, the multilateral, multipolar world, and we can talk about that too. That's the alliance that Russia and China have with basically the rest of the world outside of North America and Europe and Australia and New Zealand. Outside of them, the rest of the world is in a multipolar world now. The West thinks it's still the unipolar power. It's not. And the economy is going to collapse. They timed it. They knew that their economy, which is printing money out of thin air, not even backed by gold standard since 1944, 80 years now, it's not been backed by a gold standard. And they've been just simply printing money out of thin air, usury interest, meaning war debts by taxation. 1913 was a hell of a year because they passed the Federal Reserve Act and the Federal Income Tax Act. And basically, we all became slaves at that point, now for over a century. And the money supply of America is not through the government or any kind of real federal body. The Federal Reserve is not a federal body or entity. It is a Rothchild central banking cartel that's now parked inside America in Wall Street and the Federal Reserve banks. And their game is to crash the economy at the same time that we are now going to be in World War III. This is the scenario that we're now facing here this year. And it's looking more obvious every single day by evidence that's coming forth. So let's get into the. Okay, I mentioned the policy of the West, which is totally controlled by the cabal of these bloodline families, and the provocation, encirclement, going after all the countries that border the Russia and China and make them hostile enemies, install nuclear weapons right on the border. Now, that was done to America back in 1962 when Premier Khrushchev of the Soviet Union sent his missiles into Cuba, 90 miles away from Florida Keys, southern part of the United States. There were anti-American Russian missiles aimed at America. So what did John F. Kennedy, the president at the time, do? He made an ultimatum to Mr. Khrushchev and said, we're going to have a World War III unless you get those fucking missiles out of there. And Khrushchev, not wanting to die or his country die, he took them away. Now, the same exact situation is presently going on with NATO members, the new NATO members, Sweden, we got Finland, we got all along the border, Ukraine. They want them in NATO so bad. Hopefully the war can be finished before it becomes a NATO country. But that's the agenda. Every single country that borders Russia. There's only one country that borders Russia that's an ally of Russia, Belarus. Only one. All the rest of the countries that border, they have been taken over through NGOs and coups and a lot of money, bribery, and they bought off. And there's NATO members along the border of Russia. And that's why there's NATO troops lined up, ready for World War III along the border of Russia. They even just came out the other day in the press with their little secret weapon where U.S. troops are going to have, what do they call them, border pathways into the fight against Russia. They just came out with this the other day. So they've been planning this a long time. Everything that happens now is like years or maybe even decades in advance. We have a cabal of secret societies that, you know, decides things way in advance of the actual date of occurrence. So anyway, the provocation policy is such that they're going to provoke Putin into taking action against the NATO countries. And the provocation is coming primarily in the last month, especially. It has been sending longer range missiles made in America, made in France, made in UK, and probably even Germany. He's acquiescing. Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, very weak guy. He says one thing and then he always, you know, turns around and does another because he reacts to pressure. And so he's gone along with it. So they're sending all these longer range missiles to Ukraine so that they can hit targets inside Russia. They've been doing this for a while secretly, but they made it public in the last month. So all the longer range missiles that Ukraine is now launching are going straight into Russia. Belgorod, which is a border region and city, is getting hit. They're hitting civilian targets, which is against Geneva Convention international law to go after civilians, but they're purposely hitting civilian targets. They're hitting nuclear targets inside Russia. I mean, and as if this isn't bad enough, and they're sending troops. These weapons, the longer range weapons, the AT, it's the Army Tactical Missile, the ATACMs, and the HIMARS from America, and then the ones from France and Britain. They all are technically required to have the NATO forces from France and UK and America to be able to coordinate the launching of those missiles on precise targets. So they're in Ukraine. They're in Ukraine. We have ground forces in Ukraine. They say they're advisors, but no, it's more than that. And of course, people like Emmanuel Macron, who used to work for the Rothschilds before they put him in that, installed him as the politician in France. He's been working on that for months now, saying we're putting troops in there. Don't rule it out. So yeah, they got them. And because just like with the warplanes, the American-made F-16s, they're sending almost 100 of them from countries like Denmark and a whole bunch of them are sending their F-16s and into Ukraine. If they get them inside Ukraine, well, even if they're not, if they're parked in NATO countries on the border of Ukraine, Russia's going after them. They're going to be bombing those airports and the warehouses where those planes are, wherever they are, whether they're in NATO countries or they're in Ukraine. Because those F-16s have the capability of delivering nuclear warhead missiles. So the stakes are going up every day towards boom. And so we're on the verge of basically a false flag, or it could be a justified move by Putin to take out those F-16s that are lining up in the countries near Ukraine or inside Ukraine. He'll be taking them out. The Russian intelligence is probably the most advanced on Earth. Their weaponry also is one of the most, if not the most advanced on Earth. They're way ahead of us in weapons. That's why this whole thing, like I said, they're trying to depopulate the planet, and they're using the West as the big bully to go in and provoke and cause World War III. Well, it's a setup to destroy the West. The elites do not want the West existing. They want to destroy the West. How do you destroy the West? You put a bunch of he-she's in uniform. You have a woke military. You have allowances where they can, I want to be a woman. And for a whole year, they don't get assigned militarily because the priority is the taxpayers are paying for their cutting off of their dicks or tits. It's just unbelievable what they're doing, but tax-paid expense. So they've emasculated, femmed down to the point where we have these supposed men thinking they're women psychotically because of this social engineering, and we can get into that too, with the woke LGBTQ, all that. We got them walking around in the mess halls in the U.S. military posts now in dresses. They're women. It's just unbelievable. So, and then my buddy, Lloyd Austin, they had the mandated kill shot. In 2021, they forced every single military duty, reserve or active, to get the shot, or they have to leave the military. And thousands of them left. I think there's something like 10,000 that actually did leave. And these guys were in the military for a long time. They were the best soldiers and smartest because they valued their life and decided, okay, I have no option. If I want to live, I have to leave the military now. So our military has been decimated by this illness, psychotic illness of wokeism and LGBT delusion and the kill shot. And we don't have the strength. That's just the personnel aspect of weakness. We don't have the military personnel that is comparable to the military forces in Russia and China. We don't have they made sure that whatever shots were available during COVID in Russia and China did not have that lethal effect. And that was all pre-planned. Like I said, their plan is to destroy the West. And why is that the plan? Because the West, in their so-called democracy, it's never really been, but we have had a constitutional republic at one time here. We don't anymore. The United States is no longer, it's a banana republic, meaning political opposition goes against all other political opposition, puts them in jail, which is what's happening in America right now with Trump, the witch hunt on him. He's also controlled opposition. I don't believe he's going to be the savior for 1 second. He's got a little faithful following, though, at least. And he may become president if there is a November 5th election, but I doubt there will be. And we can get into that too. But I don't think there's going to be an election on November 5th because it's going to be one hell of a long, hot summer in America. There's going to be all kinds of shit going down. And they're going to then use the excuse, it's a national emergency and we declare martial law and cancel the election. That's my scenario of what will happen. But anyway, what's going to happen in the immediate future is probably the start of a kinetic World War III. And then it's completely because the puppets in the West are following orders from their command center, which is the City of London Rothchild banking cartel. They own everything, like I said, including all the puppets in the West, and probably a lot of puppets elsewhere as well, beyond the West. I'll tell you, money, it's like they say the root of all evil. Well, unfortunately, yes, to a great extent, it has been used for very evil purposes of control and domination and death on this earth. The usury debtor system, which was basically brought on by the Rothschilds, although there was even in existence. The Islam faith it's outlawed. Usury is outlawed amongst all the Muslim countries. They will not have any part of that. That's always been basically the Rothschild, Rockefeller, black nobility, bloodline families that are responsible for that exploitation of the earth and domination of concentrated power in fewer and fewer hands. So that's what all this is about. And in the meantime, to gain absolute control with the CBDCs, where they have 24-hour surveillance over all the population as neo-feudal slaves, where you can't do any transactions. They're going to outlaw cash. And everything will be done through basically the computer, and they'll have the whole digital ID set up and CBDCs, and you can't do anything. And like I say, outlaw cash, and they know about every transaction. That's what they're going for, with a very reduced population. So it's under absolute enslavement control. We've been enslaved for centuries, but it's not even close to the neo-feudal system that we're going to have under the total control with social credit scores. If you have a mind of your own and speak it, and they're watching, listening, they will, and they're modeling after China. the Communist Chinese Party in China. You know, it's all patterned after that. We have Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum founder, basically saying, yes, that's the model. You know, social credit scores and CBDCs and that. That's what they're going for. And they're using the collapse of the world economy with a World War III to do it. Because, and of course, controlling the food supply. They've been moving in on that one too. All the green energy, that's all about starvation, famine and starvation. They're putting in all these rules, laws that by such and such time, zero carbon. Well, that's all bullshit. It's a hoax. This whole climate change thing, that's all bullshit. That's mind control. And they got a lot of younger generations hooked down on this climate change. Oh my God. You know, it's not scientifically based. Everything's politicized, you know, for evil purposes. Uh, okay, I've been doing a lot of talking. I know your voice went out a little bit, so you can talk a little bit here then. Go ahead.
Joaquim, thank you very much. It's a lot to unpack, and it's all it's all very unfortunate and sad. What where can people find you? I know you have, if you type your name in, Joaquim Hagopian, it shows all your books. Where can people find you?
I am on jameshfetzer.org. Our good friend Jim Fetzer, yeah, he's a heavyweight out there doing the job of you know making sure people know the truth. And I'm right there side by side with him.
Big
We're
time.
both on contributors on Veterans Today, and I've known him for almost 10 years now. Great man, he's a great hero, and boy, they've gone after him. You know, he said nobody died in Sandy Hook and wrote the book and all that. Well, they're going after him. That's another thing we should talk about. I don't know. Out here it's hard to look at the clock.
We
What
got
time we have?
we got less than 1 minute, it says,
Are you kidding? Whoa. Okay. Geez, I did a lot of talking. All
but
right. You can also find me on Gordon Duff's website, inteldrop.org. You can find all my 5 books, every single chapter on pedoempire.org. The late Robert David Steele helped me out with that, where I wrote those 5 books. And